Imagine you find the perfect house, 3 bedrooms, nice neighborhood, good school district. You've saved for years, you've done everything right, and you're finally ready to make your move. You show up to the open house on a Saturday morning, and there are 40 other people there. By Sunday evening, the house sells for $60,000 over asking price to a buyer you never even got to compete with. You go home, open your laptop, and start searching again. Same story. Every house, every neighborhood, every price range. And you start asking yourself the question that millions of people are asking right now. What is actually going on? Because you were told that if you worked hard, saved your money, and did things the right way, home ownership was waiting for you on the other side. That was the deal. That was the promise. Now, but somewhere between that promise and right now, something changed. And most people have no idea what it actually was. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on what's really happening to the housing market. And I promise you, it's more layered, more deliberate, and more important than anything you've heard in the news. Most people, when they struggle to buy a home, land on the same explanation. There just aren't enough houses, and they're not wrong, but they're only seeing one piece of a much bigger picture. It's like standing in front of a massive puzzle, looking at one corner and thinking you understand the whole image. The popular story goes like this: demand is high, supply is low, interest rates went up, and now everything is expensive. Simple supply and demand. Nothing sinister, nothing unusual. Yeah, but here's the thing about that story. It skips over several massive forces that are quietly reshaping who gets to own property in this country and who doesn't. There's a psychological concept called the availability heuristic. It basically means we judge a situation based on whatever explanation comes to mind most easily. And the easy explanation for the housing market is always interest rates, or millennials, or remote work. Those things matter, but they're not the whole story. The whole story is harder to see. It involves billion-dollar institutions, invisible ownership structures, rising hidden costs, and a population that just keeps growing into a supply that can't keep up. Let's break it down, piece by piece. Let's start with something that most people don't fully grasp. Over the last decade, most large institutional investors, we're talking hedge funds, private equity firms, and publicly traded real estate companies, started buying single-family homes, not apartment buildings, not commercial real estate, regular houses in regular neighborhoods. Now, this isn't entirely new, but the scale of it changed dramatically after 2012, and then again after 2020. Think about it this way. Imagine you're at an auction trying to bid on a rare item. You've saved up $2,000, but sitting across from you is someone with $2 million, and they don't actually want to use the item. They just want to own it, rent it back to people like you, and collect the income forever. That's the dynamic that entered the housing market. Companies like Invitation Homes, BlackRock-backed funds, and other institutional players started identifying entire zip codes, often in growing mid-sized cities in the Sun Belt, and buying hundreds of homes at a time, sometimes directly from builders, sometimes sight unseen, paying cash, waiving inspections, closing in days. A regular buyer simply cannot compete with that. You're not losing because you didn't save enough. You're not losing because your credit score isn't high enough. You're losing because you're playing a different game than the person on the other side of the table. And here's where it gets psychologically interesting. When we can't explain why we're failing at something, we tend to blame ourselves. Maybe I'm not trying hard enough. Maybe I should have bought sooner. Maybe I'm just not good with money. But that internal blame keeps your eyes pointed at yourself, when the real action is happening somewhere else entirely. Now, let's talk about something even fewer people know about. It's not just about who is buying. It's about how they're buying, in ways that are almost invisible to the average person. A significant amount of real estate in the United States is now purchased through LLCs, limited liability companies. When an LLC buys a house, the name on the deed isn't a person, it's a company name. Something like Sunridge Property Holdings LLC or Blue Peak Residential Trust. This means that when you look up property records in your neighborhood, you might not realize that the house down the street and the one beside it and the one on the corner are all owned by the same entity, just under different LLC names. It creates a kind of invisible landlord class, distributed, hard to track, and operating at a scale that's almost impossible for a regular person to compete with or even recognize. And when those homes are rented out, because that's the business model, they're permanently removed from the pool of homes available for individual buyers to purchase. Think of housing supply like a bathtub. Water is flowing in through new construction, but there's a second drain nobody's talking about. And institutional investors are what opened it. Here's where things get really personal. Even if you somehow win the bidding war and get the house, the story isn't over. Most people think about home ownership in terms of the mortgage payment. But the true cost of owning a home today has quietly expanded in ways that most buyers don't fully account for until they're already inside. Property taxes have risen sharply in high-demand areas. Homeowners' insurance premiums have surged, particularly in states dealing with climate-related risks like floods, wildfires, and hurricanes. In some coastal states, insurance costs have doubled or even tripled in just a few years. Some major insurers have pulled out of certain markets entirely. Then there's maintenance. The general rule of thumb used to be set aside 1% of your home's value per year for repairs and upkeep. On a $200,000 home, that's $2,000 a year. But on a $500,000 home, that's $5,000 a year just to keep the house functioning, not improving. Just maintaining. Add in HOA fees, which have become more common and more expensive. Add in rising utility costs. Add in the cost of borrowing at interest rates that are dramatically higher than they were just 5 years ago. What this means is that a home that feels affordable at the listing price can quietly become financially suffocating once you're inside it. There's a term for this in behavioral economics, the planning fallacy. We consistently underestimate the time, cost, and complications involved in future decisions. And when it comes to home ownership, a deeply emotional purchase, a symbol of success and stability, that cognitive bias is working in overdrive. So let's zoom out and look at the full picture. You have institutional buyers removing homes from the buyer market and converting them into rentals. You have hidden ownership structures that make it hard to track how concentrated that ownership is becoming. You have a true cost of ownership that's risen dramatically beyond just the purchase price. And then, sitting underneath all of this, you have the most fundamental pressure of all. The United States adds roughly 2 to 3 million people every year through natural population growth and immigration. Every one of those people eventually needs a place to live. But here's the structural problem. Building homes is slow, it's expensive, it's tangled in zoning laws, permitting requirements, labor shortages, and material costs. In many desirable cities, local regulations make it extremely difficult to build more housing, even when demand is screaming for it. So you have demand that compounds every year, and supply that can barely keep pace, let alone catch up. It's like trying to fill a swimming pool with a garden hose while more people keep jumping in. And when you layer that supply-demand imbalance underneath all the other forces we just talked about, the institutional buying, the LLC ownership, the hidden cost creep, you start to see that the housing crisis isn't one problem. It's 4 problems, stacked on top of each other. Here's the psychological truth that ties all of this together. We are wired to think about the world as fair. If we work hard, save money, and do the right things, rewards should follow. That's a deeply human assumption. Psychologists call it the just world hypothesis. We want to believe that outcomes are proportional to effort, but markets don't follow that rule. Markets follow money. And right now, the money is flowing into housing in ways that have nothing to do with your effort, your savings, or your intentions. Understanding that isn't pessimistic. It's just reality, and reality is the only useful starting point. So what do you actually do with this information? First, stop blaming yourself. If you've been trying to buy a home and keep losing, or if home ownership feels genuinely out of reach, you're not failing. You're navigating a market that has structurally shifted against individual buyers. That's not an excuse. It's context, and context matters. Second, expand your definition of building wealth. For a long time, owning a home was the primary vehicle for middle-class wealth building in America, but that assumption needs to be examined. If the true cost of ownership is rising, if the market is structurally tilted, now and if your capital might grow faster in diversified investments, that's worth thinking seriously about. This doesn't mean renting is always better. It means the math deserves an honest look, without the emotional weight that home ownership carries in our culture. Third, follow the money, not the narrative. When you hear simple explanations for complex economic problems, ask what's missing. Who benefits from the simple version of the story? What's happening in the parts that don't get covered? Institutional ownership of single-family homes is a policy issue as much as it is a market issue. Several cities and states are beginning to debate legislation around it. Being aware of that conversation and participating in it as a citizen is just as important as your personal financial decisions. Here's the thought I want to leave you with. Every generation inherits the economic conditions created by the decisions made before them. Your parents' generation bought homes in a market where institutional investors weren't a factor, where interest rates eventually came down from their historic highs, and where supply was relatively easier to access. You are buying, or trying to buy, in a fundamentally different market. And the worst thing you can do is use yesterday's roadmap to navigate today's terrain. The housing market isn't broken by accident. It's being shaped by incentives, capital, policy failures, and structural mismatches that have been building for years. Understanding that doesn't solve everything, but it does something more important. It puts you in the right conversation, because the people who build real wealth aren't the ones who got lucky in a fair system. No, they're the ones who understood what game was actually being played and made smart decisions from there. The question isn't just, can I afford a house? The question is, given everything I now know, what's the smartest move I can make from where I'm standing? Think about that.